I've known Kevin, well, probably a decade or more,
Please, yes.
um, as a customer first, and then as my go-to for questions about pasture maintenance and care. So I'm thrilled to have him on tonight because he really, really understands what healthy soil is and how important it is and how to attain it. So Lizzie and I go back so many years. It's like we're joined at the hip. So everybody, I think, pretty much knows that Lizzie is an important part of BioStar, even though she doesn't work for us. She's a really good friend of BioStar, and we work together on formulas and ways to help dogs and horses. So, without further ado, we'll go right to Kevin, get to the meat of the matter, and yes, be very afraid, Kevin.
I am very afraid. So,
How does soil become unhealthy?
um, probably the number one reason is just to overgrazing, overused. That's probably the very first thing because soil needs to have coverage, and when you have too many animals out there grazing and walking around, you start to take away the shade. In order for it to have a healthy soil, you need moisture, you need carbon, you need oxygen. That are all very important. And so once you start to overgraze, and particularly in the weather that we have now, that you have these month long of 90 degrees weathers, it just completely depletes all the moisture and life out of the soil. Um, so that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen when I go to a farm is just too many animals on a pasture at one time. It's the number one thing.
What are some of the signs of unhealthy soils, other than just seeing that the areas are grazed to the
Goes
ground?
down, predominantly one of the first things you'll see is that basically just you see dirt. That's something that you don't want to see out in a pasture. You don't want to be able to stand there and see the soil. The soil should be covered, and you can also go by particular sets of weeds. You can like buttercup is a sign of a too acidic, and thing for ragweed. Um, there are some weeds like the pigweed will show you that there's too much organic matter and it's been compacted and it's gone anaerobic, which causes like pigweed or gypsum, things like that. There's a great book. It's called Weed Controls Without Poisons by Charlie Waters. You can get that on Acres. It's a very good book to read and you can study the weeds that are in your field and they'll tell you some of what's missing in your pasture as far as amendments and things of that, or what you might be doing wrong. Um,
Right.
because you know, nature up here abhors a vacuum, and so something's going to come in there and come in this place. And more than likely, if you're not taking care of the soil, it's going to be weeds. That's the
So, what can you only sort of address the soil issues in the spring, like with liming and
no, no. You can address them all the time. You can address them all the time. Of course, the number one thing that you should always try to do with your soils is get a soil test. I mean that's going to tell you exactly where you are. And just as you said about the lime, your pH is probably your number one thing that you need to try to address in the very beginning. If the soil is too acidic, you're going to struggle from the get go. So your optimal goal. If it's just if you're just trying to do a grass pasture, the pH could be anywhere between 6 and 7 is good. If you're going to be trying to mix in some legumes, you want to be up to have the pH a little higher, like around 6.5. But it's something that you don't need to stress immediately because it's going to take time. If you do lime it, let's say your pH is at 5.8 and you lime it, and the next year it's 6. You've come a long way really in a short amount of time. It takes years to get the pH back to where you really want it to be and start building up organic matter and life in the soil. Um, I've got my own little thing going on here. I bought a property, I guess last year, about a year and a half ago, and it's been horribly overgrazed. And so this is going to be a quite a project for me. One time there were like 50 horses here on the property, and so it's been I've got a lot of issues. So this is going to be a good experiment for me to see exactly what all can be done in an amount of time. So we're down to 20 horses now. So
So do you do rotation
that is
and
that
let
is
the
that
pasture
is, that
look
is,
for
that is very important. We've started to work with the Jefferson Soil and Water, and we're going to doing some fencing, cross fencing. We did done a couple of fields on our own, and so you'd be amazed how quickly the grass can start to make a comeback if even if the horses are pulled off just for a couple of weeks, just to give them an opportunity. In particularly, like just this short amount of time, things were looking pretty rough there in June and in July. I pulled the horses off. They've been off about 3 weeks off of our front field. We've had all this rain, and I'm probably going to put another group back out there this coming week. We've had that much of a sprout back of the grass that's out there. So any bit of relief is amazing. Even if you could just section it off just with like temporary electric
Yeah.
fencing, even if you just put in those little plastic stakes. Horses are pretty they pay attention to that electric tape pretty well. Once they get shocked, they have a keen understanding that that's not where they want to be, and that could be very effective way to cordon off pastures just in a short amount of time. Is just with that electric fencing.
What do you think is a good rest period for a pasture? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a
Two,
month?
3 weeks if you could. I mean, longer than that if it's possible. I mean, like I say, I mean, if you've got the time and the money, you just break it up into all kinds of little pastures and just be constantly rotating. But that becomes even more difficult when you're trying to move horses around, or if you
Right.
do wish to, if you do want to ride on your property, having so many gates to go through is not enjoyable. Because if you don't have a good gate horse, your life sucks. So, so, um, so yeah. So I mean, 2 to 3 weeks if you can. The summer it could be a little longer. Going into the fall, 2 weeks would probably be a great time when you got a lot of moisture. If you can get in there and get a little bit of particularly if you've got some legumes planted in the pasture, a little bit that's going to be supplying some nitrogen. I always try to advise that if you don't want to have too much clover or alfalfa or birch trefoil, but it's good to have some in there because it's a nitrogen fixer. It will constantly always be providing something for your grass, and also clover is pretty tough. Clover's a is a tough little legume as far as taking traffic. It'll come back up again pretty well. So
Would you do a mix of orchard,
I would, yeah, yeah. It's
fescue?
always
I
best.
mean,
It's always if you can always do a mix. Like a fescue, some orchard grass, a little bit of ryegrass. I think you and I talked about just as a seasonal thing earlier
yeah,
this year about teff. Teff does great during the summer. I'm also looking at there's like a crabgrass called dalrymple that comes out of it's from Oklahoma. It's the design actually for making hay. It's a hay um, crabgrass. So looking
huh?
into that maybe it's supposed to be something for summer because as you got to be thinking ahead. Climate is changing,
Yeah.
and you got to be thinking that the cool season grasses are going to have a shorter amount of time. And like I say, they don't take the grazing that well during the summer, and so that's where something like if you did a teff overseeded with the teff is going to go away. But this I've been reading about this crabgrass that'll come back again during the summer, and it's very palatable.
Wow.
It'll come back again in the summer, very palatable, but it goes away in the winter. So it's you always got to be trying to have something coming along, something coming along. So
How do you improve unhealthy soil in backyards?
now you're much easier to do because you're more of a microclimate type of area. You can do your soil test and get an idea of what exactly you need. Because generally your yard is going to be someplace that you're going to be more financially able to address situations, like in a pasture. If you realize that you're low on boron or something, it's kind of hard to address that because generally you're going to need a little bit of boron, but you're going to be trying to cover a big area. Whereas in
Right.
a yard you can do it just with a small push fertilizer or something just behind a little lawnmower tractor, and you can really zero in on your deficiencies in your soil. I'm a firm believer in just we sell a composted chicken litter. It's a 343, slow release, works very well. It's high in calcium because it comes from an egg laying facility. The phosphorus is it's the phosphorus is the 4% is available immediately, but there's more over a period of time. Um, Composting, you can get some compost in the yard, which you can easily make on your own, and just do a thin layer, because all that's doing is putting live bacteria back into your soil, mycorrhizal fungi, which is incredibly important. A lot of times people just they focus so much on the bacteria, but the mycorrhizal fungi is just as important for anything that you try to do. So yeah, if you really have a little compost pile in your yard. If you do chickens, I would suggest maybe having your compost pile by your chicken house. Let the chickens get out there and do some work, because they'll get out there and scratch around in it. Their manure is very high in nitrogen, and
Yeah.
like I say, the four major components to good compost is carbon, nitrogen, water, and oxygen. And you get those
Oxygen.
four oxygen. You do not want it to go what's anaerobic. Always get those. I struggle with those two. You don't want it to go anaerobic. And you can always tell if things are not going well if you have a very strong ammonia smell. When you go out there and try to turn it, there's a strong ammonia smell that lets you know that you need to loosen up. You need some more oxygen in there. You can you can try to address that also with the smell with just some clay. If you have some clay around, or even just some high calcium lime, not hydrated lime, but like a high calcium lime or a dolomitic lime, something like that will also work very well with that.
Would you recommend leaving things like dandelions and some of what I call the happy weeds?
Yes, I would. Yes, by all means. Yeah, like I say, there are certain weeds like a plantain is very nutritious.
Yeah.
Dandelions are very good. There are some things that I put out a seed mix called an herbal lay. That there's a chicory is in there is good. It's called small burnet, which is kind of like a large leaf kind of four, but has a very big taproot. So that as it gets grazed down, it allows more oxygen and moisture to go down into the soil. Um, that's something else that you can do to try to bring back a pasture. Is if you can really rest it for a while, is put in like a cover crop with like radishes, because they will get out there.
Soil
They,
busters.
pardon?
They're soil
The
busters.
soil busters, exactly right. Exactly. When they come up, and you can get some that are very palatable. Actually, you can actually have them in a grazer mix. I have some in that herbal lay that are very palatable. But once they die off, that root begins to rot, and that just leaves a small hole in the ground, which allows more oxygen and water to get down into the soil. And that's something you always want to try to get as much oxygen and water down into your soil, because that'll help you with during the dry times,
Yeah.
and allows more carbon and humates to get down in there, and allows for a better root mass for your grasses to survive the summers.
Is the only way to keep the pasture ground from compacting is getting the horses off of it? Is there any way to aerate it other than resting it?
Like I say, just those little radishes will do it. We'll
Yeah.
aerate it. We'll aerate it pretty well. But you want to try to, if you can, there are some ideas which, like I say, there's a number of things that are available through the state that the state will actually provide you with some funding to actually create basically it's like a sacrifice lot that during wet conditions you have your horses in there to try to keep your soil from being compacted when it's wet. Um, they're providing the ability to put in. They'll help to pay for composting bins for horse facilities. I'm getting two of those.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm getting two of those put in. So, so that's going to be very helpful. The downside sometimes I have a tendency to wander when I talk. One of the downsides, though, of horse composting is that majority of the time you're using pine shavings
Yeah.
or pine sawdust, and that's very acidic. And so you have to try to keep an eye on that, especially if you're trying to control the pH of your soil. You can add amendments to that, like you can add lime just directly to the compost. Also, you can add wood ash. So if you do have a burn pile somewhere, you can take your tractor or something and scoop that ash and put it into your compost, and that'll help to control some of the acidity of your compost, effectively if you're using sawdust like that. That's if it's
Would it be
possible.
better to use straw?
Straw's
And
the best. Straw's the best. Straw's the hardest to clean up, though.
yeah.
It's not very absorbent, and you end up taking a lot with it. You end up with a lot of puddles in your stalls. But straw is by far the best for composting. Um, I mean, there are other people now are now using hemp bedding.
Yeah.
Hemp bedding works very well. How it's ground down is very absorbent. It has a low carbon content, so it composts easily. Downside, it's a bit pricey. It's a bit
Yeah.
pricey to use it, but you can sift through it pretty well. So you can get it to go a long way, but it's still by far the most expensive one that you can use to be bedding a stall with, or in a chicken house either. Also,
So would you recommend spreading horse manure? Remember, we've sort of gotten away from it, and now there seems to be a return to spreading manure again.
um, I would spread it. Like I say, it's just like everything else. You got to pay attention to what it is. If it is all depends on what you're feeding your horse in a lot of ways, because
Yeah.
what goes in the mouth comes out the back. Because the USDA does allow up to 400 parts per million of glyphosate to be in livestock feed, and so you could be spreading, an herbicide out on your fields. I mean, if you think about 400 parts per million, that's actually more than more than likely the trace minerals that are in your horse's feed: the copper, the zinc, the cobalt, the manganese, selenium, things like that. That all of those added together do not equal normally 400 parts per million. Um, so that's you got to be careful with what's going in there. And of course there's other herbicides that are associated. 2,4-D is out there, dicamba. I mean, there's so much out there. And today, at first, the thought was always, you got to pay attention when you give your horse antibiotics.
Right.
Not to use that manure, but the idea that the glyphosate, is a patented antibiotic. So you're feeding an antibiotic all the time if your feed contains that. So that's something to keep in mind. But as far as the ratios of horse manure, it's almost perfect when it comes out the back end. It's almost the 2-to-1 ratio that you're looking for of 2% carbon, 2 parts carbon, 1 part nitrogen. So it's almost perfectly compost when it comes out the back. It's just when you start to mix in the bedding, um,
Yeah.
that ratio starts to get so I talk to the people that that work here sometimes. That the goal is to pick out the stall. You pick the manure out. You don't scoop it out with a bunch of sawdust with it. You try to. It's called picking out the stall. Save me some money, and also take less carbon out of there, because that's the less carbon, the easier it's going to compost. So it's good. Easiness. That's what you're about. Easy to compost. Because composting, if you can get it done right and get it out onto your fields, it's probably one of the more beneficial things you're going to do, because you're going to be getting carbon, you're going to be getting humates, you're going to be getting bacteria, fungi, all of that stuff that is necessary for good soil life. Is that you're making it into a brew and you're
Yeah.
putting it out there. Um, so if you have the ability to spray, you can even try to make your own compost tea. Works very well.
Yeah.
That's a that's another issue. So
You mentioned glyphosate. If horse owner wanted to avoid the 400 parts per million, what would be a good way to avoid that in their feed or their hay?
Of course, I'm biased in this area, and you would
That
have.
was a setup, Kevin.
No, no, it was. I know, I'm going to be straightforward with you. Of course, I'm biased about this. An organic feed is the best way to go. Just because even if something is non-GMO, you're still allowed to use glyphosate. Um, there is a style of harvesting called desiccating, and what that means is that you can set your time on a calendar that I want to harvest my wheat or my oats or my barley, 2 weeks from now. So what I'm going to go out right now is go out and spray my field with glyphosate, kill it all, and then I know that 2 weeks from now that it'll be ready to harvest because glyphosate is also a salt, so it's
Yeah,
also going to be drying out the grain for me.
yeah,
And that's probably when you're going to have your highest concentration of glyphosate is when the grains are being harvested through desiccation, because it was just sprayed a couple of weeks ago.
right.
For GMO products, they probably have quit spraying, a couple of months back, more than likely. Because generally the corn or the soybeans or the sugar beets have grown up and the weeds are gone and they just let it. And now it's just shading out everything. Um, but so yeah, and so yeah, it's
How about
hard.
an hay?
Organic feed. That's the way to go. Organic feed.
How about with hay? Do we need to worry about desiccant use in hay?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
I mean, certainly it can be, but you'd be killing off your hay field, so it would be a one-time deal. You do have to worry about for alfalfa if you're feeding an alfalfa hay, because there is a GMO alfalfa.
Right.
But there are some hay that where people will do just one short cropping of a hay product for one summer, and they could possibly use desiccant. But more than likely, the thing that you have to worry about with hay would be something like Grazon or 2,4-D, things that they're being sprayed on the field to control broadleaf weeds, things like that.
Okay. Um, how about using chickens to contribute to healthy soil? I know that there are sustainable farmers who actually move their chicken coops,
Yep,
around a pasture
yep.
with their tractor. Is that a reasonable?
That is a very reasonable thing, in the sense that you're putting a lot of nitrogen into the soil. Like I said, there's also a lot of bacteria and
Yeah,
things like that coming out of their feces that you're basically also inoculating the soil that way. And they're cleaning up a lot of debris, keeping the soil loose.
yeah,
Any thatch, anything they're scratching, taking away any types of bugs. Some bugs are good. You gotta hope that they don't eat too many of your earthworms. But yeah, it's a great system if you can have the time to do it
right.
and move the chickens across the field like that. That is can be time consuming, um, but they're good for your yard also. Like I say, if
Yes,
they
they
get
are.
out there, they're always dethatching and working and working, working. So it's
Um, is it better for overall healthy soil to grow different grasses? I mean, we sort of touched on this. I'm obsessed with teff, and I
yeah,
really you bring it in next spring because I really want
yeah,
to blend it
yeah.
because we're going to have more hot summers
We
and
are. We are. And like I say, that's something we got to be thinking about. We got to
yeah,
be trying to think ahead on these things. And so, yeah, yeah, different grasses have bring different nutrition to the pasture. Some bring up different nutrients into the soil. That's one of the things that you can also, you know, do is you can put some trace minerals back into the soil. Like I say, you don't want to lose your mind in a lot of ways. So there are some trace minerals that you can do rather economically. Like I say, we sell a product called Planters 2. It is mined out of Colorado. It's a freshwater from a freshwater lake that's gone from the thousands of years ago. They mine it now, has a lot of good trace minerals in it, particularly calcium and boron and cobalt, and rather inexpensive. It's about $500 a ton. You split about 300 pounds to the acre. So at first it seems like 500 seems quite a bit, but you can get 5 to 7 acres covered up in it, and it's a good trace mineral that breaks down quickly, and is very available. But it also has a good residual effect over a couple of years. And
And what's it
it's
called again?
called Planters Two.
Planters 2. Okay.
Planters Two. You can get another quick hit product, which is like a C90, which is a dehydrated seawater. So it's kind of like a salt, but so since it is a salt, you want to use very little of it, like about 50 pounds to the acre. And so all those minerals are very bioavailable. The grass, your
Yeah.
pastures will take it up immediately, and that's probably one of the better ways to get good mineralization into your horse is have it coming up through plant material, because that mineral is very bioavailable.
Yeah.
That's why kelp is such a great product,
Yeah.
because it's minerals that come from a plant.
Yeah.
It takes very little to break it down. As the animal digests it, all those minerals are very very available.
Last question. It's sort of a leading question. I planted your herbal lay.
Hmm.
Oh, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. And I planted it all along my fence lines because I didn't want to cut the grass there
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
And it's been fantastic. I really need to renew it. It's some things aren't growing up like they did the first year or two,
Yeah.
but I was thinking of next spring adding it with a sort of pasture mix and the taff to the big pastures.
That's kind of how it was. The herbal lay is more of a is kind of a European thing, really. And if you look at the formulations, like for Cotswold in England or also New Zealand, Australia, they actually they have it with grass hay. I mean, with grass seed in it, usually like an orchard grass or
Huh.
a rye. That's how it comes. But I chose just to do it with just the concentrated, just to have the clovers, the alfalfa, the Bushman trefoil. There is small burnet. I even have like a small Essex, which is like a little brassicas in there, and then you can choose the grass you want to. So it's kind of lets you do what you want to do with it, and it works fairly well. I mean, it's 5 pounds, 5 to 7 pounds to the acre, so it goes a long way. Um,
Yeah.
and like I say, generally, I think all of them are perennial except for the brassicas. It's more of an annual, but all the rest of them are perennial. Um, and I do choose a particular birchfoot trefoil that's called Bruce that does not high in prussic acid, because not all birchfoot trefoil is created equal. Some of it can be have the prussic acid, which I think is what it's called, which is not really that good for your horse in a lot of ways. But you can choose varieties that are very low in that, and that's what we use in it. But it's a legume, and so and all of those things are nitrogen, scavenging nitrogen, helping to build your soil. So
Would you lime first and then seed, or lime and seed at the same time?
first, I'll get the soil test done. I mean, it's just 20
Yeah.
bucks just to know what you're needing to do, and then I would lime first,
Okay.
and then seed. Give that lime a little bit of time to break down and go to work. Like I say, one of the things that I'm gonna try to cheat here a little bit is use wood ash on my property. There was a lot of down trees and there's some dead trees that I'm gonna cut up. Take the logs for firewood and burn the branches and everything, and have those in piles, and then just start trying to spread those around on the fields. Just trying to take advantage of that way. That's a cheap, fixer of a pH. Um, I'm going to have to try to choose my window of opportunity, given how my property is that when I'm getting some fencing redone, that'll give a truck an opportunity to get in and get the line down at that point in time. Because once the fencing gets up, my property is so hilly It's gonna be hard to get a truck in here. So I could probably have it dumped and and have a rent a spreader, but yeah, money, 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 money. So I got to try to, like I say, I'm really gonna try to the experiment of the wood ash. Um,
That's
you're
a
gonna get
great idea.
really, which that's something you can also do, like I say, on a small scale in your own compost. You don't want to use too much wood ash. Small stuff composting for your yard, just a little something from the fireplace in there so
Yeah.
often is great. I mean,
Emily, you had a question from a customer.
Yes. Kelly says she's sending in a sample through her local extension office. After she gets the test results, how does she address amending the soil without resorting to chemical fertilizers, which we've talked about a little bit? And then she says, and how do I then apply it using the tools I have of myself, a wheelbarrow or a riding lawnmower that can pull a small garden cart behind it? Also, tips for how to set up composting for managing manure without having access to major equipment for turning the piles.
okay. Well, of course, you're, like I said, that Planters 2 works very well as an amending of for trace minerals, broad spectrum wise. As far as the big three, like I say, that wood ash is not only going to help with the pH, it's also going to help with potash. That's the whole. You get the potash ash tie in there. Phosphorus is any type of manure that you can get. Chicken manure, if you have chickens, and cleaning out your chicken house will also help out with that. Like I say, we sell a composted chicken litter, which works very well. It's a granular, spreads well. It either comes in a 2,000-pound tote, which may not be best for what you're talking about there, but it comes in 50-pound bags. Easy to handle. It doesn't really smell that bad, so the smell is gone within a day or so. But as far as gosh, the composting in a horse facility without a tractor, that's a lot of shoveling. Just to be honest with you, because you want to try to get as much oxygen in there as you can. You can layer things in there. You can put it on there and have like branches and try to create oxygen to flow that way, and then try to get the branches out later. But
I've done it with cardboard.
cardboard will work. Like I say, you can try to do it all in
I get
layers.
it wet and then, yeah.
Yeah, but that's the main thing when you don't have any type of equipment is just getting oxygen to it. I mean, getting oxygen to it, and it'll tighten up on you quickly. Um, you can go with this is very high in carbon, but you can go with wood chips. So if you know of somebody that's had trees come down and they've had some wood chipped, those work very well because it creates space. It creates space for air to get in there. So, so yeah, and I think that answer all of it there.
Yes, and Kelly just joined us, so I think she got to hear most of that answer.
Okay.
Oh, how do I address amending the soil without resorting to chemical fertilizers by herself with her wheelbarrow and mower?
Yeah, well, like I say, there's you can use like a rock phosphate. Usually that's an 030, and that's 3% is available immediately. There's 20% available over the lifetime of the product, so that's like 5 years. So you can address it. That's a good organic product. Nitrogen, of course, the manure is going to have some, but also cover crops is going to help out with that. Also, any clovers is going to be nitrogen fixing. Um, as far as phosphorus, um, for for a cover crop, buckwheat, but you don't really want to have your horses in there grazing so much on buckwheat. It causes some sort of facial issue, a blistering or something. So if you can, buckwheat comes up quickly, very quickly. So if you can pull your horses off of a paddock, get in there, put some buckwheat down over a couple of weeks, get in there and mow it down. That buckwheat is a phosphorus scavenger, so that'll help to bring up phosphorus to the top of the soil. Um, and like I say, as far as potassium, wood ash. If you can get, like I say, start spreading some wood ash in your pasture. When you clean out your wood stove or your fireplace, or if you do have a bonfire, try to shovel some of that up and just go out there and just throw it around in your paddock. So,
Did that answer Kelly's question?
I won't speak for Kelly, but I think that answers the question she emailed.
yeah, the thing about the chemical fertilizers, they're all salt based, so
Yeah.
they're gonna be drying out your soil and making it more compact. So there's that added quick boost of growth that you might see from like a 10-10-10, but on the long run, you're actually doing harm to your soil. So.
So I would just say that if anyone has questions about pasture, grasses, fertilizer, new country organics, call them. They're really knowledgeable, and you can always ask to speak to Kevin, the
Yes,
soil whisperer.
yes, please do, yeah. Like I say,
And they're
you
available
do,
online. Customer service is great there. I highly recommend them.
yeah, and we'll look at your soil sample and
Will you
give you.
actually do the testing?
Yeah, we send it off. We send it off to a lab and get it back, and we can make some suggestions on what products that we may have, or products that, like I say, that you can do something on your property or home to try to address it without necessarily needing
Would you
to spend
take
it.
it from various parts of the pasture and then?
That's the best way to do it. It's kind of like you say, very good ticker. It's like a shotgun effect. You want to go to different parts of your pasture. You want to dig down a couple of inches, take some soil, mix it all up into one bucket. If you can, try to pick through it, make sure that you get any rocks or stick out of it. Just have it try to be as clean of dirt as possible, and then just you can bring it into us, and we'll send it off. Like I say, I'm a firm believer in getting your soil tested every year if possible. I mean, it's $20. It's $20, and
Yeah.
you get an idea of how things are coming along each year, and what you may have tried in one field, may work. You may try something in a different field that doesn't work, and now you know that that's not something that's going to work for you. Um, but don't try to take it all on at one time, because it's going to cost you a lot of money, and you're going to be frustrated. Um, Trying to get your soil back to where you need it to be is a long process, and it takes patience.
Great.
Kevin,
Thank you. Whoops, sorry. Go ahead, Emily.
we did have one more question come in. If you have a fair bit of unedible weeds taking over, can you reseed without spraying or plowing with success?
Probably you're going to be able to address that by adjusting the pH. Is the first thing. You probably get a lot of the weeds out of there, and mowing. You can really take a lot of the weeds out if you continue to mow or bush hog that paddock where it is, and try to get in there and overseed with something that's going to be like a grass that's going to really take over faster. You may have to really be aggressive with the grass, but like I say, your number one thing to do is get your pH right, and get some calcium on there. That's if I had two things to suggest as far as amendments. Get your pH right, get some calcium in the soil, and you may have to just stay a little busy out there mowing it down, waking them up, weaken those weeds. Yeah.
Kevin, I have a question. So a lot of us are joining the call from Virginia, but for somewhere with a more arid climate, like where Lizzy is in Texas, you've brought up compaction and earthworms and cover crops, but for somewhere that's really dry and rocky, do you have any recommendations?
If you could get humates, you can get that in your soil. Humates are very good at helping to help for the soil to hold moisture, and also for bacteria to live in. You can order that in bags. You can also get it in 2,000-pound totes. But there are some cover crops that you can put in, and particularly for Texas, you can put in like black-eyed peas, cowpeas. Cowpeas enjoy hot, arid climates. It's also a nitrogen fixer. If you just put just a little bit in, I mean, it's also a good forage. Very high in protein. Don't want to have too much, in particular for a horse paddock. But if you did cut that, even if you didn't graze it down, if you cut it and just tilled it into the soil, it's going to put a lot of nitrogen and organic matter into your soil. I'm a big fan of cowpeas. I'm a big fan. As far as for people who are in arid climates and are doing like grazing of livestock like cattle, it's a great thing to get you through the summer months as far as trying to put weight on your animals.
Emily?
I think we've addressed everybody's questions on that part of it.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Lizzy. And Lizzy and I are going to talk about healthy soil as it relates to horses and dogs. I almost know Lizzy so well that I know what she's thinking.
Oh no.
So, Lizzy, what has been your experience working with the overall health of dogs as it relates to their environment, specifically the grass they walk on, the dirt they walk on?
Well, that's a really good question, but it's a big one.
You know me, go big or go home.
Yeah, that's what we do in Texas. So, just purely personal experience and observations that I've made with my own animals, especially when I lived in big cities. I noticed my dogs, I was living in an apartment and I'd walk my dogs, just down the sidewalk like everybody else did. And I noticed both dogs would eat, they would eat other dogs' species. That was a big pattern. And of course, I didn't allow that once I knew they were doing that. And I read that as gut stress. And so I kind of had to step up things to help their gut, but was not very successful. And in the years that I lived there, that was kind of an on and off chronic issue with both of them. It was, we would go to big dog parks and, stuff that was still in the city, and I never knew what was the quality of the soil in a public park. I mean, I could guess, but I really didn't know for sure. So I started taking them to there's a place called the Arboretum. It was a big nature center, and they had walking trails with big mature trees and lots of mulch and good dirt. And I noticed a lot of their habits with stool eating actually decreased quite a bit. And I would let them go, roll near these big trees or wherever they wanted to roll and just get as dirty as they wanted to get. And I would not wash that dirt off. So when I've lived, outside of cities, I really never saw that pattern with my dogs. And I would let them just, go get muddy and, roll in manure. I mean, whatever, sheep or goats or horses they were pretty gross a lot of times, but they were actually very healthy and very calm when they were able to do that. So does that kind of answer the question for dogs?
It does.
Okay.
Horses that live on dry lots.
Oh, such a hard one. My property is kind of like a giant dry lot because it's very rocky and cedars are everywhere and there's very, very little topsoil. So, at least I do have some living plants here, so that's, it's not a true dry lot. But the soil is always, going to be very compacted. So I do think about those horses and wonder how healthy the soil is and how diverse the microbes are. If they're rolling, I mean, like most horses do, or what's their gut health like? I mean, I've seen quite a few horses that get kind of chronic colic situations with some of these dry lot systems. But it depends also on how much, there are other management practices that have to be more intensively taken care of whenever there's a dry lot situation. So, come here, Finn. So when there's, when there's not free choice hay and the horse is on a dry lot, or there's no slow feeder, anything forage like in that category, I think that those horses are going to be very stressed, and that does affect the gut health and then the microbes and everything else. So I think it's a setup for stressed horses, but also I understand why people have to use dry lots. So I'm not for or against. It's just going to be more intensive management with a dry lot. I noticed I've had horses that eat manure a little bit more often on dry lot situations. And, that could be out of boredom. It could be for a lot of reasons. It's just something I have noticed, not here, but at other properties. Even overgrazed pastures, I've noticed similar patterns. I'm talking stubble, less than an inch and a half of grass. I'm sure Kevin
bare spots.
Essentially a dry lot.
Yeah.
So what I noticed, I was thinking about this topic, and I was working for an equine assisted therapy center, and they did everything on the ground. But we had this one horse that was, he was kind of a type A, very highly sensitive guy. And he would walk up to the most stressed kids, and he would just look at the kid and he would start eating dirt. He would just start eating dirt right in front of these kids. And it was fascinating because soon as, the kids would, work with the therapist and start dealing with their stress, this horse would stop eating dirt. It was one horse that did it consistently. So then, that horse owner ended up, I shared that with her and said, let's, get the acupuncturist out here and, look for gut stress and, let's recreate his diet and deal with his stress level. And that pattern did go away. But that was an early key for me to watch. Horses who are eating dirt, dig a little deeper, no pun intended, but start looking for other signs of gut issue or other stress patterns that the horse might be trying to share with us. So, and I know a lot of, I have a lot of empathy for horse owners who have to keep a horse on a dry lot due to metabolic issues or, laminitis or anything like that, or starch issue, that whole category. And I know that it's the only thing people can do in some cases, but I just wonder if there's a way to have even a patch, and maybe Kevin knows how to do this, a patch of healthy-ish soil that's not compacted and dry lot, like hard pan basically, that the horse could access that, because I just think about, it's not, I just wonder what it's like to be a horse who can only roll on these hard dry lots, or there's not a sand pile or anything like that. That alone would be stressful and affect the gut and the entire microbiome, I would assume. So I have a lot of thoughts on this topic. Just anecdotal, but
You came to the right place.
Yeah,
Well, BioStar is coming out next month with something for those horses.
that's great. That's great.
And we already have it out for the dogs. It's called Symbiota. Um, it blends the soil microbes of the soil microorganisms with the fulvic and humic acids and shaga mushrooms as a mirror or replication of healthy soil, fungi, microbes, fulvic and humic acids. What do you think, Kevin?
I like the sound of that. Like I say, you think that a horse out on pasture, as they're grazing, they're often picking up soil as they're pulling up the grass and different things,
Yep,
and that's constantly inoculating their digestive system with soil microbes. So
exactly. And
it's just
fungi.
and fungi in particular, and fungi. So that's like the circle of life.
Correct.
As it goes back through, they redeposit that back out onto the pasture, and then it's that same bacteria and fungi is back available again next months from now when the horses are coming back through again and grazing that same spot or area and picking up more bacteria because I read somewhere they were trying to think that there's like 90% of the soil bacteria and fungi that they still have yet to be able to isolate
Yeah.
and be able to keep it alive outside of the soil. It only stays in the soil, and so it's yeah.
It's interesting that these specific soil strains are the bacillus strains.
Yeah,
They can resist the stomach. They will
yeah.
pass through the stomach unaffected.
Hmm.
While the lactobacillus and bifidus strains, you have to microencapsulate them or coat them
Yeah, yeah.
because they get easily destroyed by the stomach. And I find that so fascinating that these specific soil organisms just are designed for the intestinal tract,
Hmm.
that they could get past hydrochloric acid and go to work in the
In the
small and
hind
large
gut,
intestine.
yeah, in the hind gut, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So I know Emily has worked with the Symbiota canine. Emily, you want to share your experience working with that?
Yes. So, in the background, you might have seen my little husky Basil. Basil, come here. Okay, well, that's a typical husky for you. She went the opposite direction. Um, but out of my four dogs, Basil has kind of always had the most sensitive GI tract. And one of the things is she pretty regularly goes to doggy daycare, and they have a lot of like sanitizing protocols there for obvious reasons. But she has been more susceptible to like bad bacterial overgrowth, like with Clostridia. And Symbiota was super helpful for her. And, it's funny, Lizzie, that you brought up stool eating because that is definitely one of her trademarks. But I think it definitely reduced when she started with the Symbiota. BioStar has another probiotic called TerraBiota that also has soil-based organisms. So that's been something that she's always on when she's going to daycare, one or the other for sure. And when she's been on antibiotics because of her bacterial overgrowth, then of course we're trying to replenish good bacteria with the probiotics. But luckily she lives on a farm and she loves to be dirty.
She's a white dog.
That's why she knows.
So I one of the reasons that I think Symbiota is so important in relationship to healthy soil is that a lot of soil is not healthy, either in our backyards or our pastures. And as Kevin really pointed out, it takes time to get a pasture to recover and a backyard to recover. So it's not something that you can do in a single season. It's going to take years and it's going to take constant monitoring.
Hmm.
And the great thing about Symbiota is it's going to support the gut for the dogs that the soil isn't healthy, or they're not exposed to healthy soil, or the horses that live on very little pasture, really overgrazed pasture, so they don't really have access to the soil microorganisms and bacteria. So it's just a way to help support the gut in a way that is most closely aligned with the healthiest way that dogs and horses live, which is outside, rolling in the dirt, getting dirty, eating dirt, licking dirt, eating the grass, and getting all the microbes up through the soil. So that's really what Symbiota equine and canine is all about, and it's a liquid. And the advantage of a liquid is you could either give it directly into the mouth, or you can add it to the food, and it's very quickly absorbed. And the fulvic and humic acids, I don't know about you, Kevin, but I am like passionate about them.
Yeah,
they're like my most favorite thing.
yeah.
I
That's
think
like I
they're
say.
so
I'm a big
now.
big fan of humates.
Yeah,
For the soil. I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. So.
it does. And I, I think back to like the Triassic time and the Jurassic time, and think of all that matter degrading and decomposing and going into the soil, and how incredible that soil must have been.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, teeming with life and vitality and minerals. And of course, I don't foresee us getting back to the Jurassic or Triassic period, but I would like my pastures to go back to that level of health. And our farming methods have really affected fulvic and humic acid content in the soil to a very dangerous degree, in my opinion.
I would agree. Yes.
And that has affected the nutrition of our food and blah, 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 blah. So that's why I'm so passionate about soil, and why I think it is such an important connection that many, I have a dog that wants to say something, that many horse people and dog people haven't quite made that connection with, that no healthy soil affects a chain of reaction in all the animals and the humans that live on it. And I think we get so focused on, our horses competing and training, our dogs doing agility and obedience and showing, and we kind of forget something that we just take for granted, and that's healthy soil. Lizzy?
Yeah. I feel like there have been so many times where I've been helping a horse owner with a chronic issue, and the horse has been kind of stuck in a dry lot, and there's really kind of stagnation as far as any meaningful progress with whether it's a behavior issue or training or whatever issue. And I do, I'm always recommending turnout, group turn, as much as I can. But so many people who are in a boarding situation have a really tough time, number one, just finding a boarding situation that works for the horse and works for the owner, and all of these different, conditions that they have. So finding a place that also has healthy soil and is actually working on continuing to build that the way you and Kevin are talking about, I think is pretty uncommon. I have not run across too many places that have been doing it this way, and I really wish this became more of the norm, because I think we would see, horses are always going to have issues, but we would see, I think, less stress based issues. And part of that's just because the horses will be out being horses, so that alone. But let's add at least healthier, maybe not top notch, because that's going to take quite a bit of time. But if that soil health could be a priority, in a holistic way and not just the conventional way, see so many fewer problems, I think. And I think, just the turnout alone, it's just going to help the feet, the mind, the entire body. It helps everything. So even finding, situations where the land hasn't really been messed with too much, I would much rather that than an overly fertilized, overly,
It doesn't have to look perfect.
no.
I'm telling this to people.
I
Just
get,
these perfectly groomed, perfect, every blade of grass is the exact same height. No, we want variety.
I get so excited to see variety. And I have Mustangs. I have 2 Mustangs. So they have taught me so much about, just watching them. We've lived in different states. So I've gotten to watch them pick through what they need seasonally. And they prefer different dirt at different times of the year. And I don't know, it's so fascinating just to spend the time to watch them. And also, places where it has kind of been a monoculture of, grass, maybe, around here we have a lot of coastal Bermuda because it's very drought tolerant and it handles hoof traffic pretty well. But I see so little diversity, and then this fear of weeds. And I know there are toxic weeds and all that stuff, but I just wish that the diversity would be a priority for the
Yes.
horses.
Yeah, some of the best time you could probably spend is just standing out in the pasture with your horse, just watching or seeing what they're eating.
Yeah.
Because you'll notice, like I say, they'll eat a little something of this and just
Yeah.
stop eating that and go to something else and start eating on that. And in the springtime, you can tell that my horses come in, they got the smell of onions on their breath.
Yes.
They've been eating some onions in
Spring
there.
onions. Yeah.
Well, and it also is such an opportunity to connect with your horse. If you have a little extra time, if you're watching, say, you're in an urban setting and you've got a hand graze or something like that, you can see, what is this horse craving right now, and get some information about what is this horse actually trying to tell you that he needs. Maybe he's craving dandelions in the spring. So definitely look at, liver health, or in the winter, they're going to crave certain other, weeds or herbs or whatever you want to call them. But they all have different characteristics and they help certain systems. And it gets to be kind of fun to pick a little of what your horse is getting and try to identify what is this, and notice the time of year that they're going for it. I love doing that kind of thing and figuring out, is this naturalized? Is this native? Is this something I can augment the soil with? What is this? So I think that gets to be kind of fun. Mm-hmm. And the dogs do the same thing. Yes. I mean, if you watch the dogs just in the yard or on walks, and they'll go for the most amazing things, and you just kind of go, why? I'm always asking why, because I love to know. But dogs that eat a lot of the spring grass, or the grass that's really close to the ground versus the coarser grasses, and
the ones that grow like right by the pond or the creek, they're like specific grasses that my dogs, and not all of them, some of them want it, and they don't want it all the time either. It's just they're sorry, it's an Australian Shepherd pylon. Oh, okay. Sorry. Emily, are there any more questions?
There are not, but I did want to say Tigger and I have an app for our iPhones that is called Plant Snap.
Yep.
A few more out there that if you do need help with identifying something, you take a picture and it searches its database and shows you like the comparable things, and you can kind of help identify just by yourself in 30 seconds what's out there. So
that is so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I'm gonna try that. Yeah.
I want to thank Kevin and Lizzy for coming on tonight and talking about something that I think is vitally important, and I hope going forward that more people start thinking about their backyards and their pastures and how we can make them better for the animals holistically and for the plants themselves and the trees and the wildflowers. It's all connected.
Yep.
So
It
thank
is.
you, Kevin, and thank you, Lizzy. Kevin, New Country
You're welcome.
Organics. You can contact him, newcountryorganics.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the next few days, this is also going to be available on our YouTube channel. So for anybody that you want to share this info with, please direct them that way.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. It's been a pleasure.
Bye. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
We'll make sure you get the link, Kevin, if you want to post it on New Country Organics.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Kevin. I took a lot of notes.
Okay.
Thanks, Lizzy.
You're welcome.